This is your host, Paula Martinez-Benj of the Knowledge Sacks Podcast. Welcome to the Knowledge Sacks Podcast, a podcast built on listener submissions, current events, and politics sprinkled with insightful historical context for curious leftist comrades. Also, friendly reminder, a lot of the topics focus mainly on Puerto Rico. We're learning and we want to learn with you. We're planting seeds because we believe we only reap what we sow, so let's sow knowledge, positivity, and accountability and watch our garden grow together. To submit your local stories, provide historical context, elaborate on a subject, or make corrections to a previously reported story, shoot us an email at knowledgesacks01@gmail.com. You can find our weekly podcast on SoundCloud, Facebook, Twitter, Podbean, Libsyn, and YouTube. All relevant links can be found wherever the description box may be located on whatever platform this podcast has been found. Let's get to the topic at hand, and today we're talking about in episode 3, Whitefish. So this is going to be probably a series of episodes because there's a lot of players involved with this Whitefish debacle, and we're going to talk about them. So this is from Vox. The FBI is investigating Whitefish Energy's contract to rebuild Puerto Rico's grid, and this came out October 30th. The FBI is examining the $300 million contract that was recently signed and then canceled between the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, PREPA, and Whitefish Energy Holdings to repair Puerto Rico's power grid, the Wall Street Journal reports. The San Juan FBI field office is looking into possible wrongdoing around the deal. Specifics of the investigation are unknown. Questions raised by reporters and others about the contract have also triggered investigations from the House, the Senate, Puerto Rican officials, and the Department of Homeland Security. The contract, which was signed September 26th and canceled Sunday by Ricardo Rosselló, was the single largest contract to date to rebuild the island in the wake of the Hurricane Maria disaster. But the arrangement drew scrutiny and criticism from the outset after it became clear that the Montana company had just 2 full-time employees and little experience with big rebuilding projects. PREPA also signed the contract in lieu of invoking mutual aid agreements with other U.S. utilities, which was what power companies in Florida did after Hurricane Irma and helped speed up the restoration of power there. Why PREPA decided to forego mutual aid and wait until 6 days after the storm to ink a deal with a little known contractor from Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke's hometown, funded by a donor to President Trump, remains unclear. But the speed at which the Whitefish contract unraveled raises additional questions of whether Puerto Rico can handle the unprecedented rebuilding effort some 40 days after the storm. The island and the U.S. Virgin Islands are still deeply affected by what is now the longest blackout in American history. It's still dark in Puerto Rico. There's still a blackout in Puerto Rico. Only about 30% of utility customers in Puerto Rico have had their power restored, though the multi-billion-dollar reconstruction push is underway. Lives are still at stake, and millions of Puerto Ricans may be waiting several more months for the lights to come on. So this is a local TV station, and they are airing a protest that took place in a suburban neighborhood in San Juan, Puerto Rico. So anyone saying, oh, San Juan, they're good, they have power, blah, blah, blah. This lady just said that she hasn't had power since Hurricane Irma. I'm going to have the link to the Facebook post down below. It's someone recording the news story on their phone. And then they have photos of the protest, so I will include that. So this is a local news story in San Juan, Puerto Rico, of people protesting because they still don't have electric.
Donde vive mucha gente, tanto joven,
So she's saying there's lots of different types of people living here. There's adults, the elderly, children. We need power, and the electric authority told us
aquí vemos que hay bastante gente reunida exigiendo a la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica que nos atienda y nos dé el servicio que necesitamos.
So it's a bunch of people demanding that the electric authority give them power, that there are many different types of people who are young, who are old, and it's just, and they're saying, and she was saying that the electric authority, that there aren't people gathering together, but there are. Just look at all these people. That's like the best translation I can give. It's just, this woman is appealing to the public and demonstrating and organizing people in her community to get together and to bring light to the fact that there is no light in this neighborhood. So this is a bunch of people protesting. So they've been 5 months without power. And it's hard to hear because in the protest, there's this person with one of those horns that you push in their hands. And I think that's why this couple who is recording this reporting are laughing, because it's like this older lady who's pushing this horn against her hand. And it is, it's not funny why they're protesting, but the horn, it doesn't, anyway. When you have such horrible things happen to you, your sense of humor becomes very, very dark. So you get really cynical real quick. So people are still without power in Puerto Rico since Hurricane Irma. So going back to the Vox article, Whitefish was politically well positioned to get the contract. As with many problems in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, the groundwork for the Whitefish fiasco was laid before storm, as Blake Sobczak of E&E News showed in a timeline of the contract on Twitter. So I actually found this timeline on Twitter very helpful, so I'm going to share it with you guys. It really puts into perspective how much work it really puts in perspective how much planning the elites have gone over the hundreds of years over time to work against the interest of the 97%. Like, they really don't care about us. They really don't care about themselves. They want this planet to go to crap because they make more money that way. I will explain further because I have a lot of episodes lined up, and you're going to be blown away by the connections that I have been making, and many other people who have been submitting information to me have been making. This is a network of work. So seriously, guys, if you have any articles or anything interesting about land grabs or watershed information or anything like that, if you have any information that you would like to contribute, any names that pop up in the episodes, any information that you have that you want to give, I vet my sources. I make sure that they are reliable. I assess what biases they may have. Like, I understand Vox is a quote-unquote progressive news site. I understand that they have had pro-Hillary articles. Like, I'm very aware of what information I am getting. That is why I do not assume everything I am reading is 100% correct, but I vet my sources. So anyway, Blake, his thread starts. With all the reporting around Whitefish Energy's $300 million deal with Puerto Rico's main public power utility, I thought I'd lay out a timeline. Summer 2017. Whitefish CEO Andy Tekmansky vacations in Puerto Rico, puts his name in with Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority via E&E News. And then it's a snippet of the article. The contract, Chimes said, stemmed from Tekmansky introducing himself to PREPA officials this summer while vacationing in Puerto Rico. Chimes said Tekmansky introduced himself to PREPA, and they discussed disaster recovery issue, so, quote, among other topics, unquote, he said. September 6, 2017. Hurricane Irma strikes Puerto Rico, harming but not destroying the country's power grid. And I would like to add some parts of the island, like the central parts of Puerto Rico, got really screwed by Hurricane Irma. Like I just reported, the Spanish-speaking news station reporting from Puerto Rico from this neighborhood in San Juan that has been without power for 121 days at the time that report aired. So, I mean, Hurricane Irma left a lot of people without power, and people have been without power since Hurricane Irma. I just want to really establish that. There's this, at least it's not that bad. No, it's really bad, guys. It's really, really bad. Anyway, so September 6th, PREPA seeks contractors for repairs. Mid-September, 2 mainland companies respond to PREPA's solicitation. According to PREPA, Whitefish Energy is one of those respondents. September 20th, Hurricane Maria strikes, completely devastating Puerto Rico's power grid. Whitefish hadn't finalized contract with PREPA for Irma repairs. 1 a.m. Saturday, September 23rd, PREPA Executive Director Ricardo Ramos has an interview with CNN. Later says communications were difficult in this time. And this is what he says. Still, despite the challenges days after Maria hit, Ramos was interviewed by CNN anchor Anderson Cooper. Well, Anderson, the whole island has been devastated, and so has the electric power system, Ramos said. September 19th through the 26th, PREPA executives decide not to engage mutual aid program that could have brought crews in from public power companies on mainland. About date range here, so September 19th through the 26th, mutual aid could have been activated before the storm made landfall. Power companies include PREPA knew the forecasts. September 21st through the 26th. At some point after the storm, PREPA employee with hiring authority, not Ramos, calls Whitefish, according to Ricardo Ramos. Ramos later said he lacked reliable communications, so one of his subordinates moved on this more or less unilaterally, but note CNN interview. September 21st through the 26th, PREPA is also in contact with at least one other utility about restoration work, Southern Company subsidiary PowerSecure Incorporated. PowerSecure Incorporated confirms it was in discussions with PREPA. PREPA, Ramos claims, company wanted money a down payment, went with Whitefish instead. September 26th, PREPA Inc.'s initial deal with Whitefish Energy posting $3.7 million for mobilization of personnel and equipment. PowerSecure sought $25 million. September 26th, President Trump announces the Federal Emergency Management Agency will provide 100% reimbursement for Puerto Rico recovery. That's bullcrap. We know that's bullcrap, but whatever. September 28th, President Trump turns control of grid restoration over to the Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA. All right, so that is a brief timeline of events as described by Blake. So back to the article. Most notably, Whitefish was already on PREPA's radar over the summer when the company's CEO vacationed on the island and met with utility officials. Utility officials worked to coordinate reconstruction with Whitefish after the storm, but didn't make efforts to reach out to other utilities for help. The company is headquartered in Interior Secretary Zinke's hometown of Whitefish and is financed by a private equity firm run by a major donor to President Trump. So that company, according to the Daily Beast, which is this link is linked in the article, $300 million Puerto Rico recovery contract awarded to tiny utility company linked to major Trump donor. Whitefish Energy Holdings, which had a reported staff of only 2 full-time employees when Hurricane Maria touched down, appears ill-equipped to handle the daunting task of restoring electricity to Puerto Rico's more than 3 million residents. Much larger utilities are more commonly used following natural disasters on the scale of Hurricane Maria, which devastated the island in September. The private equity firm that finances Whitefish, HBC Investments, was founded by Joe Colonetta, who serves as its general partner. I'm going to tell you why HBC Investments is important later on, but this is a connection that you guys need to remember, and you need to remember Joe Colonetta. Federal Elections Commission data compiled by the Daily Beast shows Colonetta contributed $20,000 to the Trump Victory PAC during the general election, $2,700 to Trump's primary election campaign, then the maximum amount permitted, $2,700 to Trump's general election campaign, also the maximum, and a total of $30,700 to the Republican National Committee in 2016 alone. Colonetta's wife, Kimberly, is no stranger to Republican politics either. Shortly after Trump's victory, she gave $33,400 to the Republican National Committee, the maximum contribution permitted to party committees in 2016. Joe Colonetta is not the only Republican connection to the controversial Whitefish contract. On Monday, the Washington Post reported that Whitefish Chief Executive Officer Andy Techmansky is friends with Trump administration Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke. Moreover, Whitefish is located in Zinke's hometown of Whitefish, Montana. Luis Vega Ramos, member of the Puerto Rican House of Representatives, told the Daily Beast, Whitefish's most important expertise or asset seems to have been having the U.S. Secretary of the Interior, Ryan Zinke, as their former congressman and current ally, and having the wisdom to retain the services of key people close to the governor of Puerto Rico. Zinke isn't the only member of the Trump administration with a connection to the Whitefish contract. In addition to Colonetta's contributions to the Trump's presidential campaign, Kimberly Colonetta's Facebook page contains a photo of her with Ben Carson, Trump's Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Another photo appears to show Kimberly Colonetta with Trump's Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. Both photos were posted the week of Trump's inauguration. Whitefish seems to be nothing more than a glorified middleman to get the real providers of the services with which PREPA, the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, could have contracted directly, Vega Ramos said. It is a cozy sweetheart deal in which Whitefish gets a gratuity for subcontracting with the actual providers. Because this is what this is. The Daily Beast touches on it. The U.S. government is an extension of the United Corporations of America. This is what it is. The elites, the people who control the world's wealth, want to prevent the aid from getting to black and brown people, and they want to make money off of it. This is what disaster capitalism looks like. This is what neocolonialism looks like. They impoverish people of color, and they steal their land and resources through the new terms of colonialism, gentrification. Now there's climate change gentrification. There's disaster capitalism. There are incredibly rich people who are buying vital resources that humans need to survive, like water. The aquifers are running dry. Last episode, I had talked about CNBC reporting that by 2030 that there's going to be scarcity of water. There already is a scarcity of water. Remember those giant droughts in 2015 that happened in California that affected Puerto Rico, and right now California is on fire with the wildfires, and Puerto Rico is suffering because FEMA is keeping the aid. In that Twitter thread that I just read that Jacob had published, that dude, he had said, that Trump had relinquished authority to FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers, the same people that screwed over the native people protesting to protect their land at Standing Rock. This is what the United Corporations of America looks like. You know, doesn't anyone think it's odd that worldwide in European countries what America is known for is McDonald's and obese people that are incredibly ignorant? Like, that's the stereotype of white Euro-Americans. This is all coordinated mass genocide of black and brown people, and people need to stop thinking that it's conspiratorial because evidence and facts are right here. I'm going to continue laying down evidence and facts. That's why this is a Knowledge Stacks podcast. I'm going to keep making content weekly, and I will try my best to get it out there. But welcome to the United Corporations of America. Federal agencies like FEMA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which are ordinarily responsible for evaluating contracts for disaster responses, have attempted to distance themselves from the Whitefish contract. FEMA did not respond to the Daily Beast's request for comment on the contract. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, on the other hand, told the Daily Beast that it does not comment on contracting decisions made by external organizations that do not involve the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. But isn't it funny how Trump said that they were in charge of cleanup, and remember last episode where I talked about the EPA, that they are in charge of cleanup of Hurricane Maria, the disaster, and yet none of these agencies are doing nothing except for trying to get Puerto Ricans off the island and further impoverishing black and brown people. This is what mass genocide looks like. This is what it looks like. They're taking us from our land, putting us in Central Florida, where there's already a housing crisis. I post articles up on Twitter all the time about how there's an affordable housing crisis in places like Orlando, and how Puerto Ricans are moving to the mainland and living out of their cars, just like white Euro-Americans who are poor do. Just the fact that homeless people have jobs isn't alarming to anyone who is comfortable currently, because just you wait. The water's getting poisoned every day. The land is being stolen every day. And one day, people are going to wake up living in a condo, buying $60 gallon jugs of water, and wondering where their next meal is going to come from, because they don't have money for food. This is what the United Corporations of America want. It's not far-fetched. Like, this is really happening. So, the Daily Beast continues. However, Prepa spokesman Carlos Morruig Aceveda told Weather.com that its contracts, quote, are evaluated and awarded by the U.S. Corps of Engineers in coordination with FEMA, which disperses the money, unquote. It is reprehensible that shameless profiteering is going on literally on the backs of the devastated people of Puerto Rico. It is beyond contempt, and people should answer for it. The Coloneta's contribution, so this goes back to HBC Investments, how the wife of Coloneta, Senora Coloneta, how she's taking pictures with Ben Carson, these links with Ryan Zinke, and Ryan Zinke is going to be talked about in this episode. We're going to talk about the players around Whitefish. Like I said, this is going to be a series of podcasts because it's a lot of information we have to cover, and it's relevant because Puerto Ricans still don't have power over 120 days later, and this is going to be an ongoing mental health crisis. This is going to be an ongoing health crisis. This is going to be a long-term report. This deserves to be reported on, and not enough people are talking about this. The Coloneta's contributions to the Republican Party precede the Trump administration. For example, in October 2011, Joe Coloneta contributed $30,000 to the RNC. In 2008, he gave $26,200 to the RNC and $28,500 to the McCain Victory Committee. During both years, Kimberly Colaneta also contributed thousands to various Republican campaigns. Joe Colaneta's relationship with the GOP is not limited to his contributions. He is a prominent figure in Texas politics. By the way, Ricardo Rosello is PNP, which is the Republican Party on the island, which is pro-Trump people, which is pro-statehooders, which doesn't even make sense. If you're Puerto Rican and you're pro-statehood, how ignorant are you to your own history? Papi, you gotta learn, you gotta read a book. Mami, ábrete un libro. Papi, ábrete un libro. Mijo, ahora es tiempo para que podamos reconocer la isla como era, como es. These people want to kill you. Los Estados Unidos quieren matar a toda la gente que tienen color de piel que no es blanca. And just because you think that you're white Latinx, now all of a sudden that you're considered white, this is what the white man does. They like to sell the illusion of the American dream to people. So they increase the definition of what it means to be white. And now white Latinx people are being considered white because in the 1980s, Italian people were discriminated against, and there were horrible stereotypes against Italian people. And this is also a topic that's talked about in Racecraft, which is a book I recommend everybody reads. And really what it is the Supreme Court has been expanding the definition of whiteness because in the 1950s, and then this Duke from Cindy Gomez-Shemp's show, Mexican Crossing Lines, he talked about this, how in the 1950s, Mexican was a race on the U.S. Census. So they are increasing the definition of what it means to be white so they can continue to sell the illusion of the American dream to people, immigrants, undocumented people, while deportating them and then behind closed doors and then behind the scenes there's mass deportations. I just read, I think it was 200,000 El Salvadorians just lost their TPS status, and I believe that will also include Haitian immigrants who came here after the earthquakes in Haiti. So, I mean, we're going to have mass deportations of black and brown people from the United States going to countries that the United States crapped on to steal their natural resources. Do you know how many puppet states the United States has in Latin America or has attempted to remove the democratic leaders and all the coups that the United States has been doing pretty openly since the inception of this country? Like, we have to re-educate Euro-Americans on their own history. And I'm still learning. Anyway, this is a problem with liberalism. It's this idea that just because we talk about different races and cultures that we're somehow less racist. What makes us less racist is stopping the institutions from systematically stealing land and resources from black and brown people and stealing their rights and their ability to live and lead lives with equal outcomes. Equity in this country is an impossibility with the institutions that we have in place, and the fact that we allow rich elites to continually systematically kill people through the how do I say this? The U.S. government does the bidding of corporations. End of story. We already live in a corporate fascist oligarchy. We're already there. People need to stop living in this facade. People need to stop living in this facade that fascism doesn't already exist in this country, because it does. If you're poor, undocumented, dark-skinned, you're going to be put in a prison, and you're going to be, because of the 13th Amendment and the way it's worded, you're going to be enslaved. And we create more laws every day, while states that are predominantly white legalize cannabis recreationally and medicinally, while we lock up black and brown bodies and white people don't do anything about it. You know how much power a middle-class white person has in comparison to black and brown people, period? And you know how much money that white people can make their own reparations to our communities. They choose not to because they like to live in this fantasy bubble that they worked for everything that they've had. And they don't ever think, oh, my ancestors accumulated wealth and bought this land or stole this land. Or, you know, there are poor white people. I get it. You know what? And people who are white who live in foster care because their parents are addicted to drugs because the coal jobs are gone. That's awful. But you know that's because of white supremacy, right? Because at the end of the day, these people aren't fighting for unions. These people aren't going out in the streets with protest signs saying, where are our jobs? Why can't we have solar panels? Why can't we provide solar power? Why are our people dying? They're not standing out in the street actually protesting and asking the government why their people are dying. They just live their lives and pretend that nothing is happening and that black and brown people are okay, are not dying, that the U.S. government isn't systematically killing us at higher rates than white people. And the poor white folks, they're just like, oh, our U.S. government is going to protect us. Because they live under that illusion because the U.S. government, the police protect them. I struggle with this a lot because it's like, don't these white people see how the police are killing them too? And don't these white people, these poor white people see that they're being killed too because they're poor and no one cares about poor people in this country because we live under a capitalist regime? We already live under an authoritative regime where people live in fear every day. Like my cousin talks about it all the time, how he sees people living in the United States and how they're so fearful and that people don't go out at night because they're afraid. But we are already here. We live in a corporate fascist oligarchy. We're already here. So the whole point of me reading that Daily Beast article was to further elaborate on the connection. So HBC Investments, Joe Colonnetta and his wife are contributors to Trump, who also fund Whitefish Energy. Oh, by the way, I'm going to go ahead and play this clip. Hold up.
Puerto Rico's governor is asking the Department of Homeland Security to audit how a small Montana power company landed a $300 million contract to help restore electric service. It was recently revealed Whitefish Energy appears to have ties to Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke and to President Trump's election effort. Juliana Goldman is in Washington. Juliana, good morning.
Good morning. Puerto Rico's outdated power grid was especially vulnerable ahead of the storm because its government power company filed for bankruptcy in July, and yet it still awarded a $300 million no-bid contract to a 2-year-old company that had only 2 employees at the time. As the island of Puerto Rico attempts to pull itself out of the dark, lawmakers in both parties want to know why and how Whitefish Energy was tasked to help rebuild power lines on the island.
We don't have enough information as to the process that went through that.
Republican Congressman Rob Bishop chairs the House committee that oversees Puerto Rico.
How it was done. Needs to be greater transparency and accountability to that. And that's the goal of our committee.
Whitefish Energy's largest previous federal contract was for only $1.3 million to upgrade power lines in Arizona.
This appears to be a pretty small company. Are they capable of doing the job that I think they...
So also, I think it's very funny and sadly ironic that these are Republicans on these committees for administering aid to Puerto Rico. So these are fiscal conservative people who enrich the rich and themselves through their donors. So just keep that in mind, that there are white Republicans who are deciding the fate of Puerto Rico on these committees.
This appears to be a pretty small company. Are they capable of doing the job that I think they're being asked?
On Wednesday, San Juan's mayor took on the company on Twitter, writing, "What are they afraid we will find?" Whitefish responded, "We've got 44 linemen building power lines in your city and 40 more men just arrived. Do you want us to send them back or keep working? Whitefish has since apologized for that tweet.
Hi, I'm Andy Tekmansky, founder and CEO of Whitefish Energy.
The company's ties to the administration are under scrutiny. Tekmansky knows Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, and Whitefish is based in his hometown. The energy company is backed by HBC Investments. Its founder and general partner, Joe Colonnetta, gave $33,000 to the campaign of then Texas Governor, now Energy Secretary, Rick Perry. And Colonnetta and his wife gave $28,200 to support President Trump's election. The Energy Department did not respond to our questions. The Interior Department and Whitefish say Zinke played no role in the contract, and the company says Colonnetta didn't either. They say they got the job in part because they were willing to take less money up front than the other company that was being considered. Nora?
All right, Juliana, thank you.
So that was CBS This Morning reporting on October 26, 2017. So are you seeing these connections? Are you with me here on the races? Here, we'll continue. Hold on. So we have connections with HBC Investments, who's giving money to Whitefish Energy. Then, so they're a very big investor, who also gave money to the Trump campaign, who is also loosely connected to Ryan Zinke, because Whitefish, Montana is his hometown. Also, Andy Tekmansky also knows Ryan Zinke because Ryan Zinke's son worked for Whitefish Energy, worked for Andy Tekmansky with a friend. All right? And I will go over that as well. So, I'm gonna make all these connections, and you're going to see how corrupt the United States government really is, and how much control they have as a colonial power over Puerto Rico. Also, I'm gonna expose the out of Ryan Zinke in this episode. Just hold your horses. This is what the work looks like, all right? This is what my job as Paula Martinez Bench en los Estados Unidos, viviendo en la diaspora. This is my job, all right? Is to save up money so I can go back home and help with Puerto Rico and bringing its independence, which it deserves, so we can be a sovereign nation, and we can make our own plans and how we want to govern our people as a collective in a world that is changing because of climate change, irreversible climate change. This is our duty as those of us living the diaspora, is to either go back home and help rebuild our families' houses and help rebuild their spirits, or we stay here and we send money back home so that our family can stay home. Because there's not enough of us to come here to the Estados Unidos and live under this regime, this authoritative regime that they have people living in. This is oppressive. These people don't know how to live. These white Euro-Americans, they think that they're living, but they're really just actively dying every day. Vox continues, one of Zinke's sons worked for a summer on a construction site for Andy Tekmansky, which is what I was just saying, Whitefish's CEO. Zinke said Friday in a statement that he had absolutely nothing to do with Whitefish Energy receiving a contract in Puerto Rico. This is what they always say. This is what they always do. But you can see their real intentions fairly easily the more homework you do on these. But the company was largely unknown, even to energy experts like the former National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners chair. And that's Travis Kavula. I've worked in the Montana electric utility space for 7 years and had never heard of Whitefish Energy until the hashtag Puerto Rico story broke. That being said, there's plenty of small firms with big hustle. It's really up to the procurer of those services to know better. Prior to the deal with Puerto Rico, Whitefish's largest federal contract was a $1.3 million deal to build 4.8 miles of transmission lines in Arizona. Puerto Rico, meanwhile, has more than 2,400 miles of transmission lines and 30,000 miles of distribution lines, the vast majority of which were knocked down after Maria. It's not just the scale of the contract. The way it was written seems to shield Whitefish from oversight and recourse. So they can do whatever the hell they want. As Daily Beast reporter Kevin Klippenstein first pointed out on Twitter. He says Whitefish contract states, quote, "In no event shall government bodies have the right to audit or review the cost of and profit elements," unquote. Wow. Incredible. Whitefish contract states Puerto Rico government waives any claim against contractor related to delayed completion of work, unquote. It didn't help that Whitefish then became mired in a social media spat with the mayor of San Juan, which was discussed in the CBS report. Even before the FBI got involved, Senate Democrats on Thursday sent a letter to the Government Accountability Office requesting an investigation. Since then, the federal government has been distancing itself from PREPA and its Whitefish contract. The Federal Emergency Management Agency denied any involvement with the contract despite the agreement stating it had approval from the agency. Meanwhile, there is a growing confusion over who is in charge of the reconstruction effort and who is on the hook for the bill. In addition to FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Department of Energy, which is headed by Rick Perry, you see these connections? Are you hearing the connections? And the Environmental Protection Agency, which is headed by Scott Pruitt, who is going to have an episode all to himself real soon. Keep up with the podcast. I'm going to tell you who these people are. I'm going to show you who these actors are. Have stakes in getting power back online in Puerto Rico. On Capitol Hill, there was a heated discussion last week, and like I said, this article was published October 30th of 2017. On Capitol Hill, there was heated discussion last week about the scope of the repair work and whether the government's mandate was to restore the energy grid to pre-storm condition or take steps to harden the infrastructure against future disasters. Or just totally doing away with it and having solar energy on the island. We might as well reconstruct the island in a way that will better the situation in Puerto Rico and make energy cheaper. Because you know how much sunlight Puerto Rico gets being near the equator and all that, being on the equator, being near the sun, all that wonderful scientific jazz, and how instead of completely redoing the infrastructure since it's already pretty much done with and beforehand was failing on the daily, hello. At the same time, the government of Puerto Rico is $70 billion in debt, while PREPA owes $9 billion to its creditors. PREPA has said the reason it went with Whitefish instead of the other, more experienced companies is because the firm didn't demand a large upfront payment, buying the utility time to scrounge up the cash. PREPA also said that it didn't ask for mutual aid because it expected that reconstruction help the federal government wouldn't cost it anything. But now utility crews are en route from Florida and New York, which means PREPA may have to come up with money to pay for relief sooner than expected. You see how these reporters report on Puerto Rico and how PREPA needs to pay this and that, and at the end of the day, that Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory that is foreign in entity, but we don't have statehood status. But if we have statehood status, we're still going to be treated like second-class citizens. So here's my thing. The only way Puerto Rico is going to get anything that it ever wants, the only way the Puerto Rican people se levantan is if we all get together and start pushing for the things that we need. Solar energy. Making sure that our water is safe to drink for future generations. Making sure that the animals and the wildlife on the island are maintained. So we can hear the songs of the coqui every night. So we can have the beautiful green parrots that are the hallmarks of our isla. So we can have el plátano. So we can continue to eat nuestro tostones. So we can mantener la cultura. Because the only way we can maintain the culture is by living the culture. And anyone saying crap about, still saying stuff about íbaros and all that, who are the people who actually maintain the culture? The Puerto Rican people, the people who work the land, the people who make your food, who make sure that you're fed. Because what were the only stores that have food in them when the hurricanes hit? The local places. And then 80% of the agriculture in Puerto Rico got knocked out. And we need to help everybody on La Isla, because this is a class war too. This is colorism too. This is what it looks like. This is what white supremacy looks like in a Latinx community. And the more that we ignore racism in our own backyard in Puerto Rico, the uglier things are going to get for the people who don't have enough. And I'm not saying that all black people are poor. That's not what I'm saying. That is a stereotype. But what I am saying is there are colorism issues in our community that impoverish darker, more melanated people in our communities because of institutional racism, because we have allowed the colonizers to colonize our minds. So anyway, that's the end of that Vox article. And so now I want to further describe Whitefish energy and the weird, sketchy, so all of these connections, right? Remember? So we have HBC Investments, Trump donors, and who are connected to Andy Techmansky, and then the small town with Whitefish, Montana, that Ryan Zinke grew up in, the Secretary of the Interior, who is buddy with Trump. Okay. And then he has connections with Andy Techmansky because his son worked there. Usually people who hire other people's kids have some kind of close connection with them. Right? Because Kushner has a job in the White House, even though he has no business in being there, because he is Trump's son-in-law. He's Ivanka's husband. Do you see what these rich people do? You see the nepotism. Then you have this sketchy contract that there's not supposed to be any oversight, and then Prepa out of desperation does this contract, as far as I know, because it may be even more sinister than that. I just haven't gotten that deep yet. Or it may be nothing at all. This is what investigative journalism is. You investigate. Alright, so this is a report from the New York Times. The linemen got $63 an hour. The utility was billed $319 an hour. San Juan. The small energy outfit from Montana that won a $300 million contract to help rebuild Puerto Rico's tattered power grid had few employees of its own. So it did what the Puerto Rican authorities could have done. It turned to Florida for workers. For their trouble, the 6 electrical workers from Kissimmee are earning $42 an hour plus overtime. The senior power linemen from Land Lake are earning $63 an hour working in Puerto Rico. The Florida utility said their 40 co-workers from Jacksonville are also linemen, making up to $100 earning double time, public records show. But the Montana company that hired the workers, Whitefish Energy Holdings, had a contract that allowed it to bill the Puerto Rican public power company, known as Prepa, $319 an hour for linemen, a rate that industry experts said was far above the norm even for emergency work, and about 7 times the average salary of their counterparts in Puerto Rico. A spokesman for Whitefish, Chris Chimes, defended the cost, saying that simply looking at the rate differential does not take into account Whitefish's overhead costs, which were built into the rate. See, you see the bullcrap that these people get away with spewing all over the place? Do you believe this man for a second? Why are you billing $319 an hour when it's really not that? And why won't you include an itemized account of what you are billing? And why is it in your contract, your sketchy contract that got canceled, why is it that you don't want to be held accountable for the things that you are or not doing? And how is it that there were reports, as I think the headline from BuzzFeed was 8 months, reported in December, that power wasn't going to be restored to Puerto Rico? We have to pay a premium to entice the labor to come to Puerto Rico to work, Mr. Chimas said. Many workers are paid overtime for all the time they work. Overtime pay varies by type of worker, union membership, mainline utility company, and other factors. That still doesn't make sense as to why you're charging $319 an hour for workers. That's not how you would describe that in a contract. The markup is among the reasons that federal officials are scrutinizing all other contracts involving Puerto Rico. The control board that oversees Puerto Rico's finances is seeking more authority over the billions headed the island's way, including the power to review big contracts and randomly inspect smaller ones. 2 weeks after Prepa abruptly withdrew the contract from Whitefish, following strong criticism by federal and congressional officials of the company's expected ability to perform the work needed, more questions are being raised about the deal, including how much it will actually cost. Whitefish will keep repairing power lines until November 30th. So I'm going to skip ahead in this article because it talks about Cobra acquisitions, which is a whole nother episode. This is going to be long-form journalism. This is what I enjoy doing and doing the research. It's Cobra, excuse me. So that goes into Cobra. The situation in Puerto Rico is dire, according to the research firm Rhodium Group, which this is the largest blackout in United States history, blah, blah, blah. Okay, here we go. The Whitefish contract has been particularly problematic. The Army Corps of Engineers, which is overseeing power restoration in Puerto Rico, did not hire Whitefish because its prices were more than double what the agency considered reasonable, according to the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. They are paying $3 million for hotels and $80 a day each for food, said Johnny Rodriguez Ortiz, the president of the Organization of Retired Electrical Workers in Puerto Rico. I just had lunch with my wife and it cost me $14. Prepa agreed to pay Whitefish 3 times the going rate for aviation fuel and about double what a helicopter specially equipped for transmission line construction should cost, according to industry insiders and people with knowledge of the Whitefish contract. The company is also billing about $4,000 an hour to rent a helicopter. Companies that specialize in transmission line construction said the price is more than double what they charge. At least 4 congressional committees are investigating. And all of this costs taxpayer dollars, you guys. None of this is free. The office, this is what it looks like when the proletariat and the working poor and all these different lower class people are paying for the United Corporate States of America to maintain its status quo. This is what it looks like when the peasants are paying the monarchs and the dukes and the duchesses to protect them from other people when really they should be protected from the monarchs who are leading all of these wars. This is oligarchy fascism. This is what it looks like. We live in a feudalistic system as it is already. We're already there. The Office of Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security has also begun a review of the Whitefish contract, as has the FBI, according to media reports. Whitefish's chief executive, Andy Techmansky, has called the investigation a witch hunt. These dudes, anytime someone gets accused of molesting somebody, pedophilia, raping women, any of this, they always are like, it's a witch hunt. And it's usually them. Anyone who's saying that it's a witch hunt, it's because they're the ones that are doing weird, sketchy things. The company said on Saturday that it had completed repair of more than 150 miles of transmission and distribution power lines. To explain differences in salaries paid to the workers, the rates Prepa was charged, Mr. Chimes said in an email, the rates in the contract were fairly negotiated between Prepa and the company were based on the mutual knowledge about the difficulty of the work and associated risks. He said the company was making a single-digit profit on the Florida workers because costs in Puerto Rico were higher. Still, the cost came as a surprise to the public utilities in Florida that had sent workers. We know what we're invoicing is our straight costs, said Chris M. Gent, Vice President of Communications at the Kissimmee Utility Authority. Normally, when utilities help each other recover from disaster under mutual aid agreements, quote, nobody's marking anything up, unquote. This is stupid. These people want to make money off the misfortune of Puerto Ricans. You don't need to be spending $80 a day on food. All right? Now that we have laid a foundation of what exactly is Whitefish Energy, their connections with HPC Investments, and we're laying out some of the players, Andy Tekmansky, Ryan Zinke. We're going to cover two of the main players today and their backgrounds and why the U.S. government is a racist institution of the United Corporations of America. And basically every episode of this podcast will be that. This is from Alternet. Why is a small Montana town a hotbed for far-right activity? And it's written by Liz Posner, and this was published December 27th. Something fishy is going on in Whitefish, Montana. The small town of 6,500 is in one of America's most rural regions, but it has occupied a lot of media space this year. And this is 2017. But 2018, baby, let's go, mira. I'm about to expose these people. I don't care if no one listens to this podcast, but let me tell you, 5 years from now, when we're starting the water wars, you're gonna wish you had listened to me. Since the beginning of 2017, the town's name has popped up repeatedly in stories about the far right. Whitefish is the home base for Trump's potential private spy agency. So, Paula, Whitefish, Montana is a mess. Yes, it is, girl. Yes, it is. Come here. Lend me your ear. So, when I first started reading this article, I was like, what? Spy agency? And this is BuzzFeed News, the Trump administration is mulling a pitch for a private rendition and spy network. A private company has proposed that the U.S. government pay it millions to undertake intelligence and covert operations. All right? So I'm going to skip ahead. I'm going to include this article in the show notes. The White House and CIA have been considering a package of secret proposals to allow former U.S. intelligence officers to run privatized covert actions, intelligence gathering, and propaganda missions, according to 3 sources who've been briefed on or have direct knowledge of the proposals. One of the proposals would involve hiring a private company, Amtor Group, for millions of dollars to set up a large intelligence network and run counter-terrorist propaganda efforts, according to the sources. Amtor's officials and employees include veterans of a variety of U.S. covert operations, ranging from the Reagan-era Iran-Contra affair to more recent actions in Iraq and Afghanistan. Amtor declined to discuss the proposals, but a lawyer for the company said in a statement to BuzzFeed News that the type of contract being contemplated would be legal with direction and control by the proper government authority. Another proposal presented to U.S. officials would allow individuals affiliated with the company to help capture wanted terrorists on behalf of the United States. In keeping with that proposal, people close to the company are tracking 2 specific suspects in the Middle East, in a Middle Eastern country, the sources said, for possible rendition to the United States. Why in the world are we privatizing Secret Service activity? Why do we have the Secret Service? And why are we disrupting politics of another nation? Because we're not spreading democracy. This is neocolonialism. Anyone who is in the military is partaking in the stealing of resources of other human beings. We don't live in a democracy. We already live in a totalitarian fascist state. And then you have the conglomerates. The news is more corporate than it ever has been before. Anytime I try to read articles on the Washington Post, more than 3 or whatever the limit is, Jeff Bezos wants me to pay to read more. What is it? Like, there's only 5 or no, now it's 3. It used to be there were 5 conglomerate major news organization. I forgot the fancy words for it, but now there's only 3 companies producing news. And then you'll see the same news story in like Whitefish, Montana, as in Lexington, Kentucky, as in San Juan, Puerto Rico. It's just crazy. It's crazy what's going on with all these different elements. Anyway, the proposals sound like a convoluted movie plot, but 2 of the sources familiar with the project say discussions have been held recently with top national security officials. The CIA declined to comment, but a U.S. government official downplayed the proposal's significance. The idea they are pitching is absurd on its face, he said, and it isn't going anywhere. CIA Director Mike Pompeo has publicly promised that the agency would become much more vicious and aggressive. He said in one speech that the administration is prepared to engage in activities that are different from what America has been doing for the past few years. Oh, the privatization of war and contracting CIA and secret operative missions to ex-military personnel. That sounds like a great idea. That's what Tiger Swan was doing at Standing Rock. That's why the Red Dawn's boyfriend was an FBI informant. I mean, this is crazy. This is America. Amtor Group is a reclusive company headquartered in Whitefish, Montana, a town of 6,500 residents that recently gained notoriety after a company based there then lost a $300 million contract to rebuild Puerto Rico's electrical grid. There is no known relationship between these 2 companies. Amtor's website describes its mission as providing extraordinary security solutions. It claims to, quote-unquote, maintain an experienced cadre of cleared professionals that possess subject matter expertise in the areas of intelligence training, collection and analysis, risk assessment, and counterintelligence to support U.S. and friendly foreign government activities around the globe. Among the management of Amtor is John McGuire, a former CIA case officer who reportedly led a U.S. effort to provoke Saddam Hussein into war before the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Sources say McGuire and others who run Amtor previously worked with the late Dewey Claridge, a CIA officer known for his colorful personality. Indicted, then pardoned for his role in the so-called Iran-Contra affair during the administration of President Ronald Reagan. Claridge also tried in 2008 while in his 70s to set up his own private intelligence agency. This reminds me of Archer so much.
It was still a stupid plan. Whoa, Bucky, what is this?
We hold erection for king.
Well, that's flattering. It's not really necessary.
He means elections.
Oh, well, that makes more... Wait, what?
Time for new king, Raja Peru.
Okay, pirates, hey, take a knee. Noah, you wanna...
That won't translate. It's like last week when you said, lend me your ears, and they were like, Appa! I can't do idioms, sorry.
Shut up. Well, then unshut up and tell them that I understand their frustration.
Do you? Saya mendengar Anda.
But you don't change horses in mid...
Idiom.
Right. All right, now is not the time for a new king.
Sekarang tidak ada Raja Baru.
Because the king is strong.
Raja yang kuat. If you so strong, Melawan Raja.
What's Melawan Raja?
Oh, king fight. If the king loses to a challenger in one-on-one combat, he has to step down. Or just be dead.
Since when? What is your problem with the Irish?
You mean besides not being on our side in World War II?
Yeah, besides that. Wait, seriously? They were Nazis?
No.
Oh, they're not Japanese.
Neutral.
Okay. I got that out of my system. It feels good. Among mTOR's unusual cast of characters is a cosmetic surgeon, Keith Rose, who lists himself on his LinkedIn page as the medical director of mTOR. He was involved in Claridge's Eclipse group, according to two people who are familiar with both Claridge and Rose. Rose did not return a phone message to his medical clinic in Corpus Christi, Texas. The pitch to the Trump administration began in the summer. According to the former intelligence official familiar with it, it involved at least three components: collecting intelligence on terrorists using a network of assets in a denied area, meaning spies in hostile countries, an online propaganda operation to counter Islamic extremism, and rendition planned. So I skipped a part here, but Claridge ran the business under the name the Eclipse Group. Reportedly, his operation was for a time funded by the Department of Defense. Claridge died in 2016. Here is a name that is going to sound familiar. One source saw the plan presented in a PowerPoint. He says it appeared that the pitches coincided with a widely publicized effort by Eric Prince, the private security official founder of Blackwater, and brother of Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, to privatize the war in Afghanistan. But the source speaking on behalf of the company says that while Prince is close to some mTOR officials, he has nothing to do with the rendition plan or the other proposals. Even though the proposal looks just like his. But who knows, right? As BuzzFeed News reported earlier in November, a CIA official assigned to the NSC once worked on an assassination plan at a time when the agency had contracted it to Prince. Privatizing intelligence operations and covert actions is highly controversial. Ooh, but not so controversial that Mike Pompeo, the CIA director, is saying, let's do things different under the Trump administration. So, asked about mTOR's proposal, the rendition plan, one former senior intelligence official said, all the institutional structures exist to prevent things from going off the rails. Is this an attempt to circumvent oversight? Because it is an attempt to circumvent oversight, because these people want to control, corporations want to control the people, the workers, and strip away their rights, so the only thing that they are able to do is work and die. And the younger we die, the less money they have to contribute to our 401s to take care of us when we're old, and the less they have to do for us if we're dumb, fat, and stupid. Corporations do not want to take care of you guys. They want to make money off of y'all. That's why you have CEOs constantly it's a revolving door if you're a CEO to suck as many pennies out of profit margins as you can. And the way you do that is not providing health care for workers, not providing 401ks for workers, by firing people from the government and having less oversight so the government can become more centralized and more fascist. We live in a corporate fascist oligarchy. We're already here. Going back to the alternate article. So Whitefish, Montana is home to Amtor Group, the agency, the private spy agency that was proposing to Trump to hire them. And then Eric Prince is loosely involved in that group. Former CEO of Blackwater. If you keep up with Cindy Gomez-Shem's reporting on Ed Higgins, he has been connected to Blackwater via a ALS bucket challenge video that had members of Blackwater in it, and Ed Higgins is in that video. And earlier in 2017, the town drew media attention as the proposed meeting point for an anti-Semitic rally. On the surface, these may not seem related, but on closer examination, all three are clearly linked to the Trump White House. Let's begin with Whitefish Energy. After Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico and left the island without power, a tiny company based in Whitefish operating for less than 2 years was contracted to restore power for a hefty fee of $300 million, which I've already explained to you the misuse of funds with that and what they were trying to claim and all of this ridiculousness. And also, I'll go over it in this episode or the next part of this episode because it's definitely going to be a 2-parter at least about Whitefish and their lawsuit. The Puerto Rican government opposed the Whitefish Energy deal, and it ultimately fell through, terminating November 30th. The FBI has since launched an investigation into the contract. It was through the Puerto Rico story that many first learned of the Trump administration's ties to Whitefish. Secretary of the Interior Ryan Zinke grew up in Whitefish and has personal and business ties to the energy group, contracted for the work in Puerto Rico, leading many to suspect that Zinke had ulterior motives for choosing the firm over larger, more experienced competitors. The Washington Post reported that Whitefish CEO Andy Techmansky and Zinke are acquainted, but only Zinke's office said in an email, and that's the whole thing with his son being hired by Whitefish Energy as a summer job. But only Zinke's office said in an email, because Whitefish is a small town where everyone knows everybody, Zinke's office said he had no role in Whitefish securing the contract for work in Puerto Rico. Techmansky also said Zinke was not involved. Special favors among powerful business owners and local politicians, while unethical, aren't anything new. And once the relationship between Zinke and Whitefish Energy was revealed in full, Puerto Rican officials called for a contract to be voided. Actually, the company continued to work through November until it claimed it was owed over $80 million in fees by the government. According to Slate, under the contract, subcontractors made as much as $462 per hour, racking up high costs for Prepa, which was already billions in debt before the hurricane struck. But that wasn't the last we would hear of Whitefish, Montana. Most recently, BuzzFeed reported that Trump was considering launching a new intelligence agency that some are calling a private CIA, Amtor Group. The company that submitted the proposal was a private contractor that provides intelligence and militia manpower to governments and corporations, and is based in Whitefish. BuzzFeed says there's no known relationship between Amtor and Whitefish Energy, but both groups have connections to the Trump administration, in addition to Zinke's tie to Whitefish Energy. Amtor has an advocate close to the president, Eric Prince, brother of Betsy DeVos, and a vocal proponent of American government's use of private contracted militias like his own, Blackwater. Prince is one of the key figures pushing the Trump administration to employ private spies, and Trump is allegedly tempted as he's frequently expressed his disdain for both the CIA and the FBI because they're investigating him. That's why. because he did weird, sketchy stuff with the Russians. And anyone saying that the Russia story, blah, 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 yeah, the Russia story is pretty irrelevant to the lives of most of those who are working poor. But the reality is, there are spies, there are coups. This isn't made up, controversial, conspiracy theories. This is really happening. And America needs to wake up to the fact that the U.S. government has been involved in rigging elections all over the world, and it's finally coming around and affecting our elections. We are the results of hundreds of years of colonization by the Europeans, and now we were an imperialistic power, and the empire is getting too big to maintain itself, so now the United Corporate States of America, the fascist oligarchy, is revealing itself more and more every day as the people are becoming more and more impoverished. And it's not simply black and brown folks who have been systematically killed by the United States government since its inception. It's now poor working white folks who are also being killed by the government. Yep. Rich people have been running the world since people started saying, we should make things worth things. Gold is now worth more than water, and let's privatize everything and monopolize everything and control where people can and cannot get food and how they can and cannot get food. Well, welcome. We live in neo-feudalism. Hello. Simmering beneath these suspicious White House deals is the well-documented tradition, so this is the alternate article, of white supremacy and neo-Nazism in the town of Whitefish. The town is home to white supremacist leader Richard Spencer and Chuck Baldwin, a radical right extremist minister who preaches Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and homophobia, among other strains of hate. BuzzFeed News looked into the remarkable growth of white supremacism in this isolated region and explained the trend of neo-Nazis moving to the area as follows. Flathead County, population 96,000, is one of the whitest places in the nation, 95.2%. There are other allures for people at odds with mainstream American culture. The large pockets of open space and the ability to live off the grid, the lack of restriction when it comes to gun ownership, the Montana political ethos, some mix of libertarian, conservative, and don't with me is inviting that way. As a local pastor put it, it's a place where people can feel safe when they say outrageous things. Gee, what? Neo-Nazis in Spencer's camp planned to march on Whitefish around the same time as the Women's March earlier this year, in a rally targeted against Jews, Jewish businesses, and everyone who supports either. The Daily Stormer promised around 200 skinheads would invade the town carrying high-powered rifles to defend Spencer's honor. In response, counter-protesters gathered. Local residents handed out, matzah? Oh yeah, handed out matzah ball soup, and the skinheads never showed up. The Whitefish city government has repeatedly denounced Spencer and his presence in their town. The mayor said in a public statement last year, the city of Whitefish repudiates the ideas and ideology of the founder of the so-called alt-right as a direct affront on our community's core values and principles. The city of Whitefish rejects racism and bigotry in all its forms and expressions. The wave of right-wing hate in Whitefish is also connected to Trump's cabinet. Here again, Interior Secretary Zinke's name emerges. Last year, Raw Story reported on Zinke's connection to white supremacists in Whitefish. Donald Trump's newest cabinet member has ties to neo-Confederate group that inspired Dylan Roof. This is another alternate article that is linked within this article. And also, I would like to point out, if you guys don't recall, last episode I said this as well, Kushner and when Steve Bannon was still in the Trump administration were pushing for the privatization of the Afghanistan war. So Representative Ryan Zinke, like Chief of Staff Steve Bannon, brings troubling ties to organized hate groups to the Republican president-elect's inner circle, reported Fusion. Zinke made news during his 2014 election campaign where he accepted a $500 donation from Errol Holt, head of the Council of Conservative Citizens, whose writings about, quote, brutal black on white murders, unquote, inspired Dylan Roof, who gunned down 9 black worshippers the following year in a Charleston, South Carolina church. A spokeswoman for Zinke later said the Congress... It's always women, guys. It's always women talking out against these racist people to defend them. It's always freaking white women. I bet you she was white. A spokeswoman for Zinke later said the Congress would donate that contribution to a fund for the victims' families. The website also reported he co-sponsored legislation to designate English as the official language in the United States, and he discussed the bill in an interview with the anti-immigrant pro-English organization, which has been designated as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. The Spanish had control of Florida and most parts of California. The French colonized a huge portion of the central part of what is now known as the United States of America, on the mainland, the continental United States. Only reason why Americans speak English is because of the British who colonized America. We would all be speaking some indigenous language like Navajo. We would be speaking Spanish or French if the British did not win. Zinke endorsed a Montana State House candidate who was active in a white nationalist group as a student at Liberty University and has extensive ties to European right-wing extremists. Taylor Rose, the former vice president of the Youth for Western Civilization, lost his election race but garnered 47% of the vote. But he boasted that Zinke's support, along with the backing of a couple of other Republicans, made him a mainstream candidate despite his racist writings, which were promoted by the Council of Conservative Citizens. Rose's campaign website claims he managed United States Senator Steve Daines' Republican Montana campaign in the Northwest, and he also claims he worked for the state Senate Jennifer Filder, the vice chair of the Montana Republican Party and the CEO of Koch-linked American Lands Council. Greg Gianforte, who lost his Republican gubernatorial race, gave Rose $170 in campaign contributions, and he got the same amount from the GOP state's Senator Mark Blasden. White nationalist Richard Spencer, head of the National Policy Institute, has said he may consider running for the congressional seat vacated by Zinke. The state's Democratic Party called on GOP officials to denounce Spencer's campaign, but they were a bit more reticent. All right, so Zinke has ties to white supremacists. Zinke endorsed a white nationalist candidate from Montana State House in 2016, so this goes back to the original alternate article, who ended up by Liz Posner, who ended up losing but later thanked Zinke for helping him appear more mainstream. This year, journalist Wayne Madsen reported that Zinke's 2 sons were friends of former Whitefish resident Richard Spencer, and that part of the reason Spencer moved his headquarters to Washington, D.C. after Trump's election was to be closer to Zinke's as well as his friend Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller, the crazy guy who just had that interview with Jake Tapper go viral. Madsen said via email that he was told by those who've been to Whitefish that the Zinke boys ran with Spencer and his crowd. Birds of a feather flock together. In case your head is spinning, here's a recap. Whitefish Energy CEO knows Zinke. Zinke served in the same elite military branch as Eric Prince, who is now pushing Trump to contract a private militia based in Whitefish, which has emerged as a white nationalist hotbed in recent years and was the setting for a personal relationship between far-right extremists and Zinke's own family. So much for the excuse that Whitefish is just a town where everyone knows everybody. There are too many suspicious ties for Zinke's PR team to get away with that one. Smells fishy to us. Now that we've introduced Ryan Zinke as this odd and suspicious character, let's get into this. There is this article from Outdoor Life that goes over all of the things that Zinke wants to do as Secretary of the Interior. Zinke's worldview. For Secretary of the Interior Ryan Zinke, conservation means action, and action more often than not means that our public lands are poised to play an increasingly large role in a return to America's boom and bust extraction economy. In other words, for the Secretary of the Interior Ryan Zinke, conservation means action. White supremacy means taking the lands of Native people and gentrifying Native lands and taking their natural resources away from them without their consent of the masses to make money off of. Because that's what America is built on. We're not going into our hike along the snowy shoreline of Glacier National Park's Lake McDonald when I pop the question I've been wanting to ask Ryan Zinke since he was confirmed as Secretary of the Interior back in March. The way I intended to frame the question had both reach and context, even if it was a little wordy. Quote, "You consistently identify yourself as someone who models himself on Theodore Roosevelt," unquote, was how I had written the query in my notebook. You've repeatedly called yourself a Teddy Roosevelt guy. Roosevelt's legacy is based on his use of the structure and authority of the federal government to protect landscapes for future generations and to promote multiple use of our public lands. So far in your administration, you've made headlines for rolling back protections of federal land under your jurisdiction. Most recently, national monuments in Utah. Can we expect to see initiatives modeled around Roosevelt's conservation ethic in the future? Well, this doesn't even go into, the stealing of native lands, the encroaching of treaties, poisoning the land, logging the land to the point where there's barren areas in the forest, not taking care of biodiversity. This doesn't go into any of the things that have actually occurred in America's history. But I remember I'm rereading The War Against All Puerto Ricans. So it's on page 15 of the book. On July 21st, 1898, the U.S. government issued a press release stating Puerto Rico, it's spelled P-O-R-T-O, that's how they try to change our name, will be kept, ellipses. Once taken, it will never be released. It will pass forever into the hands of the United States, ellipses. Its possession will go towards making up the heavy expense of the war to the United States. Our flag, once run up there, will float over the island permanently, unquote. On the floor of the U.S. Senate, Republican Senator Joseph B. Foraker declaimed, quote, Puerto Rico differs radically from any other people for whom we have legislated previously, ellipses. They have no experience which would qualify them for the great work of government with all the bureaus and departments needed for the people of Puerto Rico, unquote. Within a few years, Puerto Rico would be stuffed with bureaus and departments, becoming a base for Roosevelt's big stick policy in the Caribbean. In fact, nearly a decade before the Spanish-American War, U.S. President Benjamin Harrison and Secretary of State James G. Blaine had already been considering the island's value as a Navy coaling station, provision center, and stepping stone to the Latin American market. Eugenio Maria de Hostos, the great Puerto Rican educator, summed it up as follows, quote, "How sad and overwhelming and shameful it is to see Puerto Rico go from owner to owner without ever having been her own master, and to see her pass from sovereignty to sovereignty without her ruling herself," unquote. The United States told Puerto Ricans a very different story, however. On July 29th, 1898, 4 days after the landing of American troops, Major General Nelson Appleton Miles issued a proclamation from his military headquarters in Ponce. It was the first official public statement from the U.S. government explaining its plans for Puerto Rico. The chief object of the American military forces will be to overthrow the armed authority of Spain and to give the people of your beautiful island the largest measure of liberties consistent with military occupation. So none. So no liberties. Okay, got it. We have not come to make war against a people of a country that for centuries have been oppressed, but on the contrary to bring you protection not only to yourselves, but to your property, to promote your prosperity. Oh no, we're just stealing your land, and we're just going to tell you one thing and go behind your back and do another thing for centuries on end. But let me digress and let this quote end. To promote your prosperity, to bestow upon you the immunities and blessings of liberal institutions of our government, and to give the advantages and blessings of enlightened civilization. The enlightened civilization held some firm views about their neighbors. On February 22nd, 1899, the New York Times ran an article headlined "Americanizing Puerto Rico," describing Puerto Ricans as uneducated, simple-minded, and harmless people who are only interested in wine, women, music, and dancing. As late as 1940, Scribner's commentator stated all Puerto Ricans are totally lacking in moral values, which is why none of them seem to mind wallowing in the most abject moral degradation. In 1948, popular writers were still ranting that Puerto Ricans were not born to be New Yorkers. They are mostly crude farmers subject to congenital tropical diseases, physically unfit for the northern climate, unskilled, uneducated, non-English speaking, and almost impossible to assimilate and condition for healthful and useful existence in an active city of stone and steel. The most colorful and color-conscious opinions were voiced by the southern wing of the Democratic Party. Here are some choice words on the floor of the U.S. Senate from Senator William B. Bate, Democrat, Tennessee, who had served as a major general in the Confederate Army. What is to become of the Philippines and Puerto Rico? Are they to become states with representation here from those countries? From that heterogeneous mass of mongrels that make up their citizenship, that is objectionable to the people of this country as it ought to be, and they will call a halt to it before it is done. Jefferson was the greatest expansionist, but neither his example nor his precedent affords any justification for expansion over territory and distant seas, over peoples incapable of self-government, over religious hostile to Christianity, and over savages addicted to head-hunting and cannibalism, as some of the islanders are. What? The national perception was clear. Puerto Ricans were ignorant, uncivilized, morally bankrupt, and utterly incapable of self-rule. But our bodies sure as hell were used for war. That's for sure. The U.S. would protect them, tame their savagery, manage their property, and deliver them from 400 years of solitude. All right. So this is from americaslibrary.gov, and this is Teddy Roosevelt. This is it's an online encyclopedia, a government encyclopedia. Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, July 1st, 1898. Before becoming President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He resigned in 1898 to organize the Rough Riders, the first voluntary cavalry in the Spanish-American War. The U.S. was fighting against Spain over Spain's colonial policies with Cuba. Roosevelt, and this is basically like, oh, we're losing control of resources. The rich are losing control of resources. We need the arm of the U.S. military. Oh, so let's get the land in Puerto Rico because it's socially and politically beneficial to us because they can be a coal station and they're our door to the Latin American market. That is what Puerto Rico has and always has been. It's extraction 101. It's colonialism 101. The U.S. was fighting against Spain over Spain's colonial policies with Cuba. Roosevelt recruited a diverse group of cowboys, miners, law enforcement officials, and Native Americans to join the Rough Riders. They participated in the capture of Kettle Hill and then charged across a valley to assist in the seizure of San Juan Ridge, the highest point of which is San Juan Hill. The Rough Riders are best remembered for their charge up San Juan Hill on July 1st, 1898. Roosevelt and his Rough Riders were a colorful group of characters. I don't freaking care. They colonized Puerto Rico. That's the only thing that I care about. They colonized the Philippines. They colonized Guam. They took territories that didn't belong to them by force with bloodshed for what? Because, for what? What democracy are we spreading? Where? What freedom do people have? People are subjected and forced to work low-wage jobs. This is feudalism. Teddy Roosevelt played a large role in the Spanish-American War and the colonization of Puerto Rico. Alright, and Ryan Zinke wants to be just like him. Going back to the Outdoor Life article, because we have a lot more to cover in this episode, and this episode may be very long and you may have to listen to it in separate parts, but bear with me, it's important. So this guy frames this question from the Outdoor Life interview around Theodore Roosevelt because Ryan Zinke has always claimed that he wants to be like Theodore Roosevelt. And what comes out of his mouth is, but what comes out of my mouth was, so when does TR show up? Zinke stopped walking. He squared up to me, his 6'2" stature and SEAL team glower imposing. I braced for a scolding or a lecture. What I got instead was a rambling perspective that explains much of what Zinke has done so far as secretary, but it offers an insight into a management philosophy that many interior watchers say strains, if not tortures, Roosevelt's brand of conservation, which I find completely ludicrous because these people always try to make these U.S. presidents look good when they're really just imperialist pigs. Whatever though, right? White supremacy is a thing. These people have to protect their idols. Cult of personality is an epidemic in this country. He starts by telling me a story that aligns with our previous discussion, which had been about management of national parks. Zinke, who grew up in nearby Whitefish, Montana before a Navy career that culminated in SEAL team leadership, then a stint as a state senator and a team in Congress, had met with Glacier Park administrators prior to our interview. Much of their discussion had centered on wildfire prevention, as California is on fire, and recovery. Last summer, one of the park's historic backcountry lodges, the 104-year-old Sperry Shallot, was gutted by a lightning-caused fire. Zinke had started our interview by announcing that he intends to rebuild the iconic structure. The Sprague fire that burned the chalet, was part of a wider trend last summer that saw the worst fire season in Montana in 30 years. As we walk, Zinke points to the dense stand of Douglas fir on the slopes above the lake. It's an uninviting desert of the same age trees, too thick to hike through, a monoculture unbroken by a larch or an aspen. Quote, those trees are a fire waiting to happen. We spent $2 billion on fire suppression this year. We can't afford to keep doing that. The first step in fire management has got to be prevention. The reality is that our climate is changing. We are having longer fire seasons, and fires are bigger and burn hotter. We need to reduce the fuel load. We need proactive timber management, including using prescribed burns in times of the year when it makes sense. Quote, are you recommending that we log our national parks, unquote? I asked Zinke. National parks are among the most restrictive of many designations of land use in the Department of Interior's 500 million acre real estate portfolio, a fifth of the nation's landmass. You can't hunt in national parks. There's no resource development, and many other activities are categorically prohibited, including commercial logging. His answer, I think, is contained in a looping, obtuse answer that characterizes much of our day-long discussions. The Secretary of Interior tells me that in his meeting with Glacier's administrators, he raised the question of timber management inside the park. Zinke wants to see more cutting and thinning, both to reduce the immensity of wildfire and boost the biodiversity in critical ecosystems. What? That's what these people do. They say the craziest stuff to your face. Like, we already live in idiocracy. We're already there. Like, these people are saying, we gotta water the plants with Gatorade. Like, what? Girl, what? Like, what are we doing? Zinke recounts Roosevelt's conservation vision and the political brinkmanship required to bring 165 million acres of land under federal management at the beginning of the last century. Then he cites Roosevelt's celebrated visit to the godfather of American conservation, John Muir, out in California's Yosemite Valley, years before it was designated as a national park. Historians have called this meeting the camping trip that changed America because Roosevelt came away with a blueprint for preserving America's most remarkable landscapes as national parks and monuments. Zinke tells me that the mule-pack trip that Roosevelt and Muir shared to Yosemite's Glacier Point promontory could not be replicated today because of all the dead and dying trees in the way. Fact check, you can still follow much of their trail to Glacier Point and Bridal Veil Falls. You see that? They had to fact check the guy because he doesn't even know what he's talking about. Then Zinke says the thing he admires most about Roosevelt was his appointment to Gifford Pinchot to be the first chief forester of the United States. I'm a staunch supporter of Gifford Pinchot, Zinke says. He understood the motto, which is engraved on the entrance arc of our first national park, Yellowstone, for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. White people. That's what they forgot that word. Euro-American people. He believed in active management of our public lands that weren't to be locked up or reserved just for viewing. These were lands that were intended to be used. It occurred to me that Zinke is defining himself as much as he is describing Pinchot. Nearly everything we discuss over the course of the day together, Department of Interior reorganization, Zinke's recommendations on reducing the scope of certain national monuments, his eagerness to upend collaborative conservation planning, even his enthusiasm for energy development as the foremost of the many multiple uses of federal land, comes back to this view of his role as an activist manager. An activist for what? Corporations? So this is from The New Yorker. Environmentalism's racist history. Madison Grant, Yale College, 1887, Columbia Law School, liked to be photographed with a fedora, or just his dauntingly long head tilted about 30 degrees to the right. He belonged, like his political ally, Teddy Roosevelt, to a Manhattan aristocracy defined by bloodline and money, but Grant, like many young men of his vintage, felt duty-bound to do more than enjoy his privilege. He made himself a credible wildlife zoologist, was instrumental in creating the Bronx Zoo, and founded the first organizations dedicated to preserving American bison and the California redwoods. Grant spent his career at the center of the same energetic conservationist circle as Roosevelt. This band of reformers did much to create the country's national parks, forests, game refuges, and other public lands. The system of environmental stewardship and public access that has been called America's best idea, they developed the conviction that a country's treatment of its land and wildlife is a measure of its character. Now that natural selection had given way to humanity's complete mastery of the globe, as Grant wrote in 1909, his generation had the responsibility of saying what forms of life should be preserved. Grant has been pushed to the margins of environmentalism's history, however, he is often remembered for another reason. His 1916 book, The Passing of the Great Race, The Racial Basis of European History, a pseudo-scientific work of white supremacism that warns of the decline of the Nordic peoples in Grant's racial theory. Nordics were a natural aristocracy marked by noble, generous instincts and a gift for political self-governance, who were being overtaken by the Alpine and Mediterranean populations. His work influenced the Immigration Act of 1924, which restricted immigration from Eastern and Southern Europe and Africa, and banned migrants from the Middle East and Asia. Adolf Hitler wrote Grant an admiring letter calling the book "My Bible," which has given it permanent status on the ultra-right. Anders Breivik, the Norwegian extremist who killed 69 young Labour Party members in 2011, drew on Grant's racial theory in his own manifesto. Grant's fellow conservationists supported his racist activism. Roosevelt wrote Grant a letter praising The Passing of the Great Race, which appeared as a blurb on later editions, calling it a capital book, in purpose, in vision, in grasp of the facts our people most need to realize. I mean, do you see these connections with white supremacy and how America is really built on white supremacy? For Grant, Roosevelt and other architects of the country's parks and game refuges, wild nature was worth saving for its aristocratic qualities. Because remember, back in medieval times, kings would go game hunting, and it was illegal for quote-unquote peasants to go game hunting, and trapping was illegal for peasants. And only the rich could go hunt and go game hunting. I mean, that's what's happening right now. Do you think the working poor is outside enjoying public parks? No, they're working on Saturdays and Sundays to keep stores operating, to keep food on the shelves in cities, and working the land. For these conservationists who prized the expert governance of resources, it was an unsettlingly short step from managing forests to managing the human gene pool. In a 1909 report to Roosevelt's National Conservation Commission, Yale professor Irving Fisher broke off from a discussion of public health to recommend preventing paupers, and this is in quotes, paupers, and physically unhealthy people from reproducing, and warned against the race suicide that would follow if the country did not replenish itself with Northern European stock. So remember the other day, Paul Ryan made those comments that not enough people are having children. Basically, that the only race of people, white women, are not having enough children is basically what he was saying, basically. Like Paul Ryan was dog whistling, and he was like, more white people need to procreate. That's basically what he was saying, because all other races, all other ethnicities are up, except for white people. And the whole white genocide argument has been a thing race suicide, and Roosevelt said this himself. So this article from the New Yorker, Fisher took the term race suicide from Roosevelt, who in a 1905 speech had pinned it on women who dodged childbearing. Gifford Pinchot, the Ryan Zinke, who compares himself to this dude in this interview with the Outdoorsman, or whatever the name of this publication is, the country's foremost theorizer and popularizer of conservation, was a delegate to the First and Second International Eugenics Congress in 1912 and 1921, and a member of the Advisory Council of the American Eugenics Society from 1925 to 1935. Roosevelt put Pinchot in charge of the National Conservation Commission and made him head of the new Forest Service, but he also cultivated the romantic naturalist John Muir, who founded the Sierra Club in 1892. And the Sierra Club's early leaders, the environmental movement, has some less trembling ancestors. Following Muir, whose bearded face and St. Francis-like persona were as much its icons as Yosemite Valley, the club adopted the gentle literacy romanticism of Thoreau, Emerson, Wordsworth. The point of preserving wild places for these men, and unlike in Roosevelt's circles, some women, was to escape utilitarian grind of lowland life, and as Muir wrote, to see the face of God in the high country. But Muir, who felt fraternity with four-legged animal people, and even plants, was at best ambivalent about human brotherhood. Describing a 1,000-mile walk from upper Midwest to the Gulf of Mexico, he reported the laziness of Sambos. Later, he lamented the dirty and irregular life of Indians in Merced River Valley near Yosemite. In Our National Parks, a 1901 essay collection written to promote parks tourism, he assured readers that, as to Indians, most of them are dead or civilized into useless innocence. And that's a quote. This might have been incisive irony, but in the same paragraph, Muir was more concerned with human perfidy toward bears, quote, poor fellows, they have been poisoned, trapped, and shot at until they've lost confidence in brother man, unquote, than with how Native Americans had been killed and driven from their homes in mass genocide by the United States government. Thomas Jefferson laid down the groundwork for Andrew Jackson to create the Trail of Tears and commit mass genocide of Native people that is still continuing today. It is tempting to excuse such views as the ordinary or casual racism of the time, and it does feel more like a symptom of the dominant culture than Grant's racism and Pinchot's eugenics, which touched the nerves of their organizing commitments. But Muir and his followers are remembered because their respect for non-human life and wild places expanded the boundaries of moral concern. What does it mean that they cared more about animal people than they did about some human beings? The time they lived in is part of an explanation, but not an excuse. For each of these environmentalist icons, the meaning of nature and wilderness was constrained, even produced, by an idea of civilization. Muir's nature was a pristine refuge from the city. Because this Sierra Club, all these groups of people, this is nature for the aristocracy. It's not nature for public domain. It's not a commons. They're just on nature itself, and then they claim that they're conservationists or preservationists, and they don't care about human life. These people are vegans for vegans' sake, like it's a religion. It's not an actual environmental way of living, because if they actually cared about humans, they would actually go into food deserts and start getting healthy foods into communities that are predominantly people of color who are poor. They would help their fellow white poor people. But they don't care. These vegans, these vegetarians, these Sierra Club people, they actually really could care less about helping people of color. They think that by eating vegan, fair trade food, that they're helping, but, there's no such thing as ethical consumption under capitalism. These people care more about the lives of four-legged, fur-covered animals than they do about people of color. And they care more about, they fetishize that they're saving people who work in slave conditions, overseas. But people are working in slave conditions here, and I've never seen one of these self-proclaimed vegans, go to a march and, talk about prison abolition. It's disgusting. Anyway, so the New Yorker continues. For each of these environmentalist icons, the meaning of nature and wilderness was constrained, even produced by an idea of civilization. Muir's nature was a pristine refuge from the city. Madison Grant's nature was the last redoubt of nobility in a leveling, hybridizing democracy. They went into the woods to escape aspects of humanity. They created and preserved versions of the wild that promised to exclude the human qualities they despised. Their literary icon Thoreau had said in his 1854 speech, Slavery in Massachusetts, that even his beloved ponds did not give him pleasure when he thought of human injustice. What signifies the beauty of nature when men are base? The remembrance of my country spoils my walk. But Thoreau also shared Muir's problem. In some ways, he created it. Then when he wrote about American nature, Thoreau was arguing about American culture, which even for most abolitionists meant the culture of a white nation. In his essay Walking, which gave environmentalists the slogan "In wilderness is the preservation of the world," Thoreau proposed that American greatness arose as the farmer displaces the Indian, even because he redeems the meadow, and so makes himself stronger, and in some respects more natural. For both Muir and Thoreau, working, consuming, occupying, and admiring American nature was a way for a certain kind of white person to become symbolically native to the continent. It continues, it's a great article. It goes into Sierra Club and why it's racist and the history of environmentalism into the modern era. I will leave you with this little tidbit from the article near the end. A study found that whites occupied 89% of leadership positions in environmental organizations. Going back to the Outdoor Life article. As Zinke spoke, I thought back on all the conservation groups that supported Zinke during his confirmation to the Interior Post. Nearly all cited his moderate voting record as a state senator and congressman, his self-described Rooseveltian conservation ethic, and his background as a hunting and fishing Westerner. They anticipated that he might be a lovely voice for collaboration and incrementalism in an administration that seems intent on turning back the clock on public policies. Even Zinke detractors were impressed that he rode a horse to his first day of work at Interior, embodying Roosevelt's strenuous life directive. One of Zinke's first official acts appeared to confirm conservationist support. Secretarial Order 3356 directs Department of Interior bureaus to expand public access to hunting, shooting, boating, and fishing on federal land and to actively promote those activities on wildlife refuges, national monuments, and tribal lands. On lands that don't belong to white people, let's let them go hunt on their land. Yep. This sounds like white people. White people gonna white. Zinke's Rooseveltian side seemed to show again in November when he accepted the donation of a 3,600-acre ranch that provided the first public access to a 16,000-acre wilderness area in northeastern Mexico. I'm happy to announce the Sabinizo Wilderness area is finally open and accessible to hunters and all members of the public for the first time ever, Zinke told reporters at the time. Hunting-minded conservationists hung on the words accessible and public and seemed prepared to confirm Zinke's bona fide as a manager who considered the non-consumptive use of federal lands on par with more extractive uses. But a month later, any goodwill these groups held for Zinke vanished when he recommended to President Trump that 2 million acres be removed from a pair of national monuments in Utah. Federal land removed from the monuments will still be accessible for public uses, but it will also be eligible for oil and gas leasing and expanded motorized access restricted activities under the monument status. I asked Zinke to square the objective of the fees to raise $70 million annually to fund deferred maintenance at these popular parks, with the Trump administration budget cut that cuts $300 million in national parks management. Instead of addressing the question, he introduced his vision for national parks, which could privatize many centralized services. The elites are privatizing everything. Betsy DeVos wants to privatize education. Her brother, Eric Prince, wants to privatize war. Trump wants to privatize the CIA. Now Ryan Zinke wants to privatize national parks. This is the United Corporations of America. Welcome. Quote, "We have to bring our parks into the modern age," unquote, he told me, noting that he'd like to work with private concessionaries to provide transportation services, much like the way the iconic red jammer buses transport visitors inside Glacier for a fee. He imagines working with vendors such as Tesla, because Tesla is not our friend, let me tell you, to provide transporters through various parks. Maybe the private sector can help with some of the national park system's infrastructure costs too. He said, "It will cost us $11.5 billion just to repair and maintain the park's facilities that we recently have, let alone modernizing them with bike lanes and camping facilities for RVs." Zinke proposes farming out services such as operation and maintenance of employee housing to private contractors so that parks employees can concentrate on visitors' experiences and on fixing doors and roofs of old buildings. Has nothing to do with nature, has nothing to do with this tiny little budget we have. We're going to make sure that corporations get some of it so they can provide basic services that should be provided by the government. And plus, who's going to national parks? Because like I said, it's not poor people, it's not the working poor, it's not the decreasing middle class, that's for daggum sure. Zinke actually is mulling a much larger reorganization of the Department of Interior, one that would borrow from a century-old vision of jurisdictional boundaries defined by watersheds. Zinke announced his plans to move the headquarters of at least 3 interior branches, Bureau of Land Management. This is a conglomeration of the United Corporations of America. This is what their plans are. Bureau of Reclamation and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to Denver, and to align much of the field work of consolidated bureaus along 13 major watershed boundaries. The last reorganization of the Department of Interior was 100 years ago, Zinke told me. Today, the National Park Service has its own administrative regions. The Fish and Wildlife Service has its own regions. The Bureau of Reclamation has its own regions. So how does that play out in the field? Well, if you have a trout and a salmon in the same stream, the salmon is managed by the National Marine Fisheries Service. The trout is managed by me, the Department of the Interior. The water might be managed by the Forest Service, but downstream it's there is a reason why all these different bureaus are managing these different aspects of the naturally occurring order, because that's the way it was set up, because there's different sciences involved, because there's different scientists involved, because there's different people involved in each different department. And if you want to cut the pork in government, then actually cut the pork and stop giving money to corporations and start giving it to public land uses, and stop cut, and then you're planning on cutting down forests, and then you're not even managing the wildfires, and then you're putting prisoners on the front lines of wildfires and having women from California, incarcerated women fighting fires for like $1 an hour. What are you doing, America? You're doing what you do best. Enslaving black and brown people, enslaving poor people, enslaving poor white people, and stealing resources. That's what you do best. So I'm going to skip ahead. All of this article is important because it goes through exactly how this dude thinks, how he wants to manage the resources. It is a very long article. We're going to skip ahead again. As a congressman, Zinke was roundly criticized for voting for a measure that would enable the sale or transfer of federal land to states or private entities. But later, he resigned as a delegate to the Republican National Convention after the party approved a platform plank supporting federal land transfer to state or private groups. So I asked him to clarify his position. There are buildings and facilities that the government no longer uses that we could probably divest, and there may be isolated tracts of land that don't have public access that we could look at disposing as long as the proceeds went to the land with public access. As a policy, I'm not an advocate for the sale or transfer of public lands. If there is an opportunity for a sale or trade, my philosophy is that you should always trade up. It has to be in the best interest of the public. This dude, you need to remember too, that these people, these politicians speak in doublespeak, and Hillary Clinton revealed that to all of us in the WikiLeaks. We know that that's what's up. We know that these politicians have two different views. All of them, every single one of them. Anybody with money and they're not giving it to people and they're not going to the Goodwill to get their jackets and they're not doing what they need to be doing to actually advocate from the people. There was, I can't remember I think it's Uruguay. In Uruguay, the president of Uruguay, if I recall correctly, he lived in poverty amongst the people. It's really hard for me to have respect for people who are eating 5-star meals and doing all this nonsense and it's not their birthday. And there are people who are starving out in the streets in DC right in front of them and they don't give a crap because they're making money and they're fine and they're comfortable. But Zinke's increasingly comfortable relationship with the energy sector worries critics who suggest his instincts aren't all in the public's interest. The Secretary of Interior told the oil and gas industry in July that he will expedite permitting for energy development on federal lands. This trend of minimizing the non-consumptive use of public lands while he cozies up to the energy sector baffles many Montanans who watch Zinke's political ascendancy with a mixture of respect and support. As a state senator, Zinke was reliably moderate, said Ryan Busey, chairman of the board of backcountry hunters and anglers, and like Zinke, a resident of Montana's Flathead Valley. Enough so that even when he ran for Congress, he got a lot of support from what I'd call the progressive hunting crowd. He supported land protections. He supported the Land and Water Conservation Fund. You could almost see the Roosevelt comparison if you squinted hard. But about 2 years ago, he changed. It's almost like he got locked in a room with the gas and oil lobby and got brainwashed. Honestly, it's hard to recognize Zinke now. So here are some supporters of his saying that he has changed, that he's not the same, that he probably got lobbied and fell in love with money from the gas and oil industry. This conservation from moderate to crusader is on full display in his treatment of sage grouse conservation plans. For most of my time in the West, the sage grouse, perennial candidate for listing under the Endangered Species Act, and a potential listing has hung like the sword of Damocles over everything from livestock grazing, mineral development, and motorized access across wide swaths of sagebrush country. most of it managed by the Bureau of Land Management. In 2015, 10 years of negotiations, groups as diverse as ranchers, hunters, and environmentalists agreed on a management plan that gave everyone something and no group everything. The collaborative plan was hailed as a new way forward for conscientious resource issues. Courts reviewed the agreement and concluded that it gave enough protections to sage grouse and sagebrush habitat to put off discussions of a listing. But in September, Zinke announced his intention to amend the plan to loosen restrictions on surface disturbances. What's the hurry? I asked Zinke why not give the plan time to work. He says the intent of sage grouse review is to give states more authority in land use planning. This is dog whistling 101. Anytime you say states' rights, that is dog whistling for racists. And the racists come because you know what originally was the states' rights argument was for slavery. What states could have slaves? The states are different and have different needs and blah blah blah. Zinke's a lying. Something about that quote rings queer to me, so after our interview, I studied Zinke's actions, which is contained in Secretarial Order 3353, quote, Greater Sage Grouse Conservation in Cooperation with Western States, unquote. The official intent of the order is to improve sage grouse conservation by strengthening communication and collaboration between states and the federal government. With this, and by the way, you have to remember, during the Trump administration, they're making these departments, these bureaus, the EPA, they're thinning out all of these departments, and that's fascism 101. The less people, the less oversight you have, the less control that people have over government and its habitat, while ensuring that conservation efforts do not impede local economic opportunities. Because it's not about conservation, it's about extracting from the environment, which is exactly what these people want to do in Puerto Rico with our precious metals. This is an interview with Rosa Clemente from the Laura Flanders show. So the Laura Flanders show excerpt, quote, they want a Puerto Rico without Puerto Ricans for a playground.
You're just back. You got back literally this morning as we're speaking. What's on the top of your mind that people need to understand about what's going on there? That every day people are dying from lack of water. And sometimes the movements and organizations and progressive, well-meaning folks want to talk about the next step, but there is no next step. Water is truly life. And that adage given to us by our indigenous brothers and sisters has never felt so intensely immediate in Puerto Rico right now. We're talking 4 weeks, after 4 weeks as of today.
So let me give some more context. So Rosa Clemente was a Green Party candidate in 2008, for VP, and she is a pro-independence leader, and she reported immediately after the hurricane struck, Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, from Puerto Rico, and she is Afro-Latinx. So this is her talking about what's going on in Puerto Rico.
So here's the reality check part. You and I talked before you went, and I said, if we go, we want to talk about, rebuilding different.
Yeah.
You can't rebuild different if people are hungry and thirsty and don't have the basics. So you're a rebuild different person. You're an independista going back a long time. What do you make of this situation? Like, how do we move forward and not just be begging for crumbs, the same old crumbs, probably from the same old people who have their sights set on taking over the island? Yeah, I don't think we could even think about that right at the moment in Puerto Rico. I mean, everyone we talked to said, forget about all you United States people talking about cancel the debt, the Jones Act, where Puerto Rico is going to be in a week. The everyday normal life of a Puerto Rican now exists of always standing on lines for everything. You don't get more than $200 out of ATM. The unemployment rate is going to hit 80%. 80% of people will not have jobs. There are no jobs. Although there could be, obviously.
People are now before Irma without paychecks. Remember, people were without electricity before Irma. All the electricians we spoke to said there's no way this grid is built in 6 months. People might be without power for a year. Schools will probably shut down for a year. Colleges are not reopening. Unless movements are ready to get on the ground right now and deal with the immediate, there is no future for Puerto Rico. Not saying that Puerto Ricans don't want a future, but again, you don't have water, power. People line up at the airport to text message. There's no form of communication on that island.
So how are people responding? I mean, you did talk to grassroots groups who were the first responders and who are responding in a way that the privatizers aren't. Talk about the work of some of the groups that you studied.
Doing for self. Everybody is. One thing Puerto Ricans said is that they haven't felt a sense of community like this in a very, very long time. So from the young people, if they're not in school, they're in the streets with machetes, cutting down trees. From the comeridas, which are the food kitchens that are now becoming political education hubs. I mean, impressed is not the word. I was overwhelmed with like this anger and sadness, but then like, we're doing everything on our own. Like, for people who for a long time said that Puerto Ricans, or they have the feeling in their mind Puerto Ricans can't function without the U.S. government. The U.S. government doesn't exist in Puerto Rico except to occupy and privatize. So they are doing it. Whether it's stringing up light from one power source, whether it's one generator in a car and a whole community using it, whether it's finding where FEMA is at and demanding boxes of food. They're doing it. We went to Loíza, which is the African descendant part of the island. So they've already been sort of marginalized. But to see the amount of many Haitians and Dominicans that have migrated to Puerto Rico, people say they were the first ones within 12 hours, bringing back like the carts with a little bit of fruit left, dividing and making counts of houses, like how many kids are there, how do we divide this food? So I think the people in Puerto Rico who can continue to be like the organizers and the voice that shows the empowerment of the people of Puerto Rico are very clear this is complete self-determination. But what I don't want to happen is that as we uplift self-determination, we get into this discussion, especially around Puerto Ricans, about how resilient people are. Like, people shouldn't have to be resilient to 1,000 levels to have water. And I think that messaging is almost dangerous, because part of what's happening in Puerto Rico, too, is already people are becoming accustomed to something that should not be normal. So you'll hear especially a lot of older Puerto Ricans say, well, what are we going to do? It is what it is. That's the new life. No, that shouldn't be the new life.
What should we all do next? What should we do?
I think people need to go on delegations that are led by Puerto Ricans here in the United States with connections to Puerto Ricans on the ground and literally get to work. People have to go down there with the mind of, I'm following the leadership, and at this present moment, it's not just witnessing and writing, but get to work. Then for those that do the public policy, the research, yes, go down there, but don't be exploitative of the conditions of the people. I think that's possible if people keep hearing the message and the work that we're putting out with PR on the map. I'm going back down there at the end of November. I mean, on a very...
So Puerto Rico on the Map is her journalist crew that went down there to report about what was going on after the lack of aid from FEMA and all, reporting on basically what was actually really happening. So the reality after the storm.
Very personal level, I won't be finishing my dissertation this year. And it was a hard decision to come to because I should be graduating in May. And I said, I can't. That's it. The minute I'm done with my string of gigs in November, I'm taking all that money and I'm posting in Puerto Rico for 6 to 7 weeks. It's my people, it's my island. I can't have Puerto Rico I can't have my daughter, Alicia, not have a Puerto Rico to go to. When I left yesterday, I wanted to go in the ocean. and we can't go in the ocean because of all the potential chemicals. Imagine you've been going there all your life to the island, your homeland, and there are signs saying, do not go in the water. It was devastating. Yeah, so we have to make sure that what people mostly do is understand that for a long time, for over 119 years, Hurricane America has extracted from our people. They want to extract the people. They want a Puerto Rico without Puerto Ricans for a playground. And a lot of more people are going to die if people here don't use every means necessary to front and center Puerto Rico on a daily basis.
Here's where Zinke's 10 million acre public domain citation comes in. That's the amount of federally managed sage grouse habitat that was off limits to oil and gas development under the original conservation plan. Zinke's secretarial order opens it to not only drilling but also mining, activities that acting BLM director Michael Ned, who previously ran the Bureau's Energy and Minerals program, says won't impair sage grouse. The BLM is the Bureau of Land Management. Energy development on federal lands. Because Zinke's review of sage grouse planning is clearly designed to loosen regulations for energy development in the interior West, I asked the secretary about a term I've often seen attributed to both himself and Trump, along with many influential Republicans. It has to do with altering the Obama-era policy of national energy independence, meaning no importation of foreign oil, and instead pursuing a policy of energy dominance, which is widely understood to mean exporting energy produced in the United States. How can you balance energy dominance, presumably means accelerating drilling on public lands, with all the other multiple uses your agencies are charged with managing? I asked the secretary. There is a right place and a wrong place for energy development on public lands, but it's better to produce energy right here at home, under reasonable regulations, than to watch it produced overseas without any regulations to enrich tyrants. Like here in the United States, to enrich people like you, Ryan Zinke. To enrich people who are politicians with power, who are power hungry, who are money hungry. There's lobbying industry, there's oil and gas executives that I can probably connect you to. You have connections to white supremacy. Ryan Zinke, you are the one who is enriching yourself. You are a tyrant. I don't want to send our kids to fight overseas over a resource that we have right here at home. So you're going to kill people by poisoning their water? By fracking on public lands and further poisoning the watershed? Is that why you want to divide that's why you want to divide the Department of Interior by watersheds? All of this is very, very sketchy. We have the ability for our public lands to drive an economy for the benefit of all Americans. This only benefits the rich. Oil and gas extraction only further benefits the rich and only further gives more and more power to the rich and the elites, and will continue to kill off our cultures if people do not wake up to this. His one-word solution to mitigating the impacts of energy development on public land is reclamation. If that's too vague and situational for Zinke critics who want federal land policies to default to environmental protection instead of industrial allowance, it's okay with Zinke supporter Andy Larson. A lot of us who live on or near federal lands have felt the land protection pendulum has swung too far. Larson said, Wolves ate our wildlife. Forests grew into a tinderbox. We've seen the worst of extraction, and it definitely can leave a mark. But done right, no. No extraction is done right under capitalism, because again, there's no such thing as ethical consumption under capitalism. We have slaves in the United States. We have slaves on a global basis, and it's not just the slave trade in Libya, because that's not only what slavery looks like. Any work done for free that is not of your own volition is a type of slavery. The United States of corporate America rules over us in this feudalistic, dystopian world that we live in. We live in a dystopia. We are already there. Okay. So here's the last part of the Outdoor Life article, and I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this episode, and I will continue giving you the links with Whitefish Energy, Whitefish Montana, and the links with people, with places, with companies, with corruption, with colonialism, with colonization, and how it all relates with history. And that's what this podcast is. It's lefties, it's for y'all. I jump in the car with Zinke and Interior Press Secretary Heather Swift for the drive to Whitefish. If there's a place in the West that most reflects the transition of federal lands from boom and bust resource extraction to sustainable use, it's Whitefish and the forest lands around it. Zinke is fond of pointing out that when he was in high school playing football and basketball for the Bulldogs of Whitefish High School, rival Libby High was Class AA powerhouse among the largest schools in Montana. The town's economy, which grew up around silver and lead mining on public land, was by the 1970s fueled by timber taken off the Forest Service lands all around it. The J. Niles Plywood Mill ran 3 shifts and employed some 1,000 people at its peak. The Libby High School mascot was and still is the Loggers. That was the boom time, and it's apparently the Libby that Zinke remembers. Today, the logging industry is in shambles. Environmental regulations did their part, but so did overcutting public land. The softwood lumber deal that made Canadian wood more affordable was the final nail that doomed Northwest Montana's timber economy. Libby High School was downgraded to Class A and is now on the cusp of going to Class B. The town has become one of the nation's largest Superfund sites as regulators tried to clean up cancer-causing asbestos produced by a local vermiculite mine. The lumber mill is shuttered. Today, Libby is busted. But 100 miles down the road in Zinke's hometown, the economy flourishes. Whitefish was originally called Stubtown for the old-growth timber that fueled its early years. Now it's a glittering example of the visitation economy fueled partly by a world-class ski hill that's built on U.S. Forest Service land above town, partly by the proximity of Glacier National Park, and partly by year-round recreation on public land and waters. The residential and commercial real estate markets are booming. Fancy new restaurants open monthly, and celebrity sightings are a sort of local currency. Whitefish is booming. White supremacy is booming. White supremacy and white nationalism are booming. If Zinke needs a reminder of the economic power of the sustainable use of public land, the winter skiers and snow mobilers, the summer hikers and the anglers, the fall bear and the elk hunters, then he doesn't have to look far outside the house he retains in Whitefish. He can find the same trend in towns like Durango, Lander, Pocatello, Spearfish, Walla Walla, and Moab. towns surrounded by public land that seem to be leaning into their future as they learn to leverage the sustainable visitation economy based on accessible federal land. The promise is, if not a boom, at least not the bust that inevitably follows. But Zinke often seems caught in the time warp, waxing nostalgic in a time when mining, logging, and drilling on federal land outside town fueled local economies. Think Casper, Wyoming, Williston, North Dakota, and Farmington, New Mexico. This is the Interior Department version of Trump's Make America Great Again. I'm about to ask Zinke whether less than a year into his administration, resource extraction instead of Rooseveltian conservation will define his stint as Secretary of Interior. But as we pull into U.S. Highway 2 outside Glacier Park's entrance in orange and black Burlington, northern Santa Fe locomotive idles on a railroad siding waiting to pull its conveyance of freight cars up and past Maria's Pass. In the sifting snow, with a backdrop of black-bowed spruce trees, the sight is Instagram-worthy. At the wheel, Swift calls our attention to the train. Classic, she says. It would look even better if that was a coal train, says Zinke as we pull onto the highway and head west. Yep. And we haven't even gotten into the actual nitty-gritty of what I had planned for this episode, but that's good enough for me. That's it for episode 3. There is going to be a part 2 to this episode, and I have another episode 5 planned, and it's going to be about racism in Latinx culture, and just, of course, this podcast is going to be ongoing, and I'm going to elaborate more and more on many topics, specifically focusing on Puerto Rico, which is a microcosm demonstrating the failing empire of the United Corporations of America. America. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you guys have a good week. I hope you guys have a good life. Share the podcast. Leave us a 5-star review. I'm not asking for donations because I think this is my labor of love, and I'm doing this because I don't know what else to do. I literally do not know how else to get my message out there uninterrupted. Deuces. Peace. Puerto Rico se levanta. Puerto Rico se levanta.